I suppose that everybody has a story about September 11th and where they were on that day. And I'm sure everybody's is just as important, especially to them and to the people that they care about. My story is a little different. I live downtown. I live near the World Trade Center, about 5 blocks away. I've lived there for about 2 years, but I spent a lot of time in the area, about 10 years. My best friend lived there her whole life, and I grew up on Long Island, and I was raised on Long Island, and when I used to go to the city, I started high school in Manhattan, and I never knew my way around, and she would just tell me, like, she lived very close to the World Trade Center, so she would just say, look for the buildings and follow those, and you'll get to my house. So for all my years, that's how I did it. About 2 years ago, I moved into the same building that my friend lived with her parents, and we became roommates, and we loved it. I mean, it was beautiful. The whole area was beautiful. It was getting built up, and we were by the water, and the World Trade Center had a mall, and it was amazing. And for a long time, I worked right across the street on Cedar Street, so I was very familiar with the buildings, and they were just a part of my everyday life, a part of my little world. So on September 11th, I woke up as I normally did. It was a Tuesday, and I'm a public school teacher, and I work uptown, far uptown. So I got on the train and walked to the train. It was a nice day. I remember it was beautiful. And I work on 125th Street. So I got off the train and I got to work, and I have to be there at 8:30. So by that time, nothing had even happened. And that particular day, I work for special education, and there's 6 children in my class, and usually 2 adults, me and another adult. And on that day, for some reason, my assistant wasn't there. So I had the kids in the class, just me and them. And we were just doing, they had breakfast, and we were doing our morning routine. And I remember somebody coming into my room and saying, a plane just hit the World Trade Center, but it's okay. It was just a little plane, and it bounced off. So I thought, wow, that's weird. Wow, lucky thing it bounced off, but where did it bounce off to? That's strange. So I stayed in my classroom because I was alone with these kids, and I couldn't leave them. I just couldn't. So I just sat there for a while, and I just was thinking about it, and I was, I set them up with work, and I was standing by the door because there was so much, commotion, and my principal was walking back and forth, and, I said, what's going on? And she said, oh, well, there's been an emergency, there's something happening down at the World Trade Center, but, we're going to turn all the radios off, we're going to turn all the news off because, we need for everybody to stay calm. And I didn't understand because I just didn't really know what was going on. So I said, all right, okay, but I have to call home. I said, my family lives there, my best friend, she was pregnant. She was 9 months pregnant, and for the whole time up until then, we were thinking of ways that, she could get in touch with me while I was at work, should I get a beeper or should I get a cell phone, for the big moment when she went into labor, because I was going to be there. This is going to be my goddaughter. Well, we didn't know at the time. It was just going to be my godchild, and I was going to be in the delivery with her and her husband and her mom, and so I was sitting there, and I was just waiting. And then finally, I just said, the principal passed my room again, and I said, you have to come in here. Someone has to stay in here. I need to go use the phone. So I went into the office, and there was another teacher there. There was actually 2 other teachers there, and one of them was really nervous because her husband worked across the street from the World Trade Center in one of the public schools, and another girl's roommate worked in the building. So everybody was really nervous, but again, like I said, there was no TV, first of all. There was nothing. There was no visual image of what was happening. We had a little radio, and for some reason, I don't remember it really being as, as explicit that, this was a real emergency. It was more like they were just reporting on it. So I called home, but I remember I didn't want to call my house. I didn't, because I thought if Elizabeth is still sleeping and she doesn't know, I don't want to wake her up. And, she's pregnant. She shouldn't get upset. I should probably call her mom and let her mom know that this is happening. So to me, it was as if the world, it was just a little thing, and that maybe Elizabeth didn't even know yet, or maybe her mom didn't even know yet, and I just was going to call to let them know what was going on so they could be aware. And when I called the house, her dad answered. And I said, "Hi, Bobby, it's Alyson. I'm just calling to see if everything's okay." And he was like, "Is everything okay?" No, nothing is okay. And I remember just being like, "Oh, wait a minute, that sounds more serious than what I thought." So he said, "Let me put Elizabeth on the phone." So I thought, oh, okay, I guess she's there. I guess she heard about it, So, she got on the phone. And when she did, and when I heard her voice, it's the only thing that told me, how serious it was. She was crying, and she was speaking in a way that you only speak when somebody you love has just died. You just find out the news, and you can't grasp it, and you're in shock, and you're in pain, and she told me, I said, "Well, what's happening? What's going on?" And she was telling me, and I started to, shake and cry, and I sat down in the chair of my office, and I said, "But I don't understand. I don't understand what you're saying." And she said, "There's a hole in the building. There is a hole in the building, and you can see inside." And I said, I couldn't get it. I just couldn't. I even remember now what my vision of what she was talking about, what it was, and I couldn't understand how you could see inside because they're so high up. And she said, "And there's people, you can see people." And I had no, I could hear how upsetting it was, I could hear what she was going through, and it was like listening to someone in the middle of, a war or something, I don't even know. And she told me, and the people, they're jumping, they keep jumping, and I said, "Well, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? You can't just stay there. You gotta go. You guys gotta get out of there. What's gonna happen?" So I remember her mother and her older brother in the background saying, that I should stay uptown because it's safer there, and the trains weren't running, and all this stuff. And still, it's funny now to realize, how significantly, a visual image would affect the way that you would know what was really going on. All I heard was voices and description and stuff, and even then I wasn't sure. I was so unsure. And now looking at the TV, when I see the clips, my God, if I would have seen what was happening, there wouldn't have been one thing in the world that could have kept me in that building, in that place so far away. I was petrified. I was so scared, but it didn't even touch on really what was happening. So I stayed in my school because I had no assistant, and these kids had no teacher, and the day is just a blur. And I called, after I hung up the phone, I called my mother to tell her that I was safe. And I remember thinking, okay, and I left the message, and I said, "Mom, it's me. I just want you to know I'm at work. I'm safe. I was at work when the whole thing happened. I'm very far uptown, but I remember that Uncle Joe worked in the building. So when you hear anything, I'm going to give you a call back, and you just let me know what you hear, I knew that he worked in the building because he'd been in the first bombing in 93 or something, I don't even know. And I talked about it with him once, and he told me it was the scariest moments of his life. It was the scariest day of his life. And so I remembered that, but I just thought that was a long time ago. That was almost 10 years ago. That he definitely could have gotten another job. I worked across the street for 3 years. I never saw him. He could have definitely gotten another job, and that's just how I told myself. That's just what I told myself. I didn't know for sure, so he probably still didn't work there. So the day just dragged on. Those were the longest day. I remember calling They were with a friend of mine, Elizabeth, and her family was with a friend of mine, Tammy, who was dropping her child off at school right there when the whole thing happened, and they were all stuck together. And I remember being in touch with Tammy's mother, who was at work, because the cell phones weren't working. So I was able to call this phone, this direct line. And her mother said to me, yeah, I just spoke to them. I spoke to them, and they said they were leaving and that they were going to go uptown. And, but after that, right after I hung up with them, the second tower fell, and I haven't heard from them since. So I remember just being, like, really in shock. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I was just sitting there, like, waiting, and I was picturing Elizabeth, you know, she's so pregnant. You get scared that trauma is gonna induce her labor, and if she goes into labor, I mean, all of downtown is in chaos, and there was, you know, all those hospitals were all, like, emergency or bombarded, and it was just so scary. So the minute I could get out of school, they wanted me to stay, even later, because the buses were having trouble getting to school. So they wanted me to wait with the kids whose parents hadn't come to pick them up and hadn't gotten on the bus. And I said, no way. I said, no, I can't. I cannot. I said, that's where I live. That's my house. That's my family. That's my home. I have to go home. You know, you're lucky that I've been here all day. And still at that point, I hadn't seen anything. There was no TV. There was nothing. So I left my job, and I was walking because there was no trains. So I was on 125th Street, and I didn't care because I was going to walk home. That was it. And I left with a friend of mine from work, and her name was Rita, and we were walking, and everybody was sitting on the street, and everybody had a radio on. So again, it was just these voices, like these newscasters, like these reporters, and by this time, the city was so calm. Like, it was just so calm. Like I couldn't imagine that anything could still be wrong. You know, it'd been a long time. I'd spoken to them in the morning. It was now like 3. You know, maybe everything was all right. Maybe everything just kind of was getting fixed. I don't know. So I walked, and we got on the bus because a bus came by, and the bus took us to 42nd Street. And that was it. That's as far as it would go, it said. And they said, you know, you can't go any further down. But I didn't care because I was going down. I didn't care. So I got off the bus, and the bus driver looked so sad. Like, I'm sorry, that's as far as I can take you. Like, I guess he realized that I needed to go further. I had to go further, you know? So, I got off the bus, and I called around, and I found Elizabeth, and she was home now. She had gone back home because, I guess, like I said, everything had seemed to settle a little bit. As much as it could, you know, I mean... But so I said, all right, I'm coming. I'm on my way. I'm on 34th Street, and I'm gonna walk. And after that, I called my mom, and you know, she was so upset, and she said, you know, you have to evacuate the city. You have to leave the city. You can't stay there. And I said, well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm going downtown. I'm going home, and I'll call you. There's just no other option for me. I've got to go down and see Elizabeth and her family and make sure that everything is really all right. I got to see them. So we went. I just kept walking from 34th Street. And I'm not, you know, of course I'm familiar with 34th Street. Everyone is. But I wasn't so sure of the view and where I would have seen the World Trade Center. You know, like, where did I need to stand to really see them? You know, I was telling myself, like, oh, maybe it's not right here. Maybe it isn't this avenue. Maybe if I looked down this avenue, I would never have seen them. Whatever, I kept walking, and then when I got to Christopher Street, and I looked, and I knew with my whole heart where they should have been. And they just weren't there. And there was so much smoke that I was sure that they were, like, somewhere behind the smoke, that there was, like, at least 50 stories or something left. But I just kept, well, really, when I realized that they weren't there, I ran. I mean, I ran home. And when I got right to North Moore Street, which is the block before my building, there was, like, millions of people and, like, EMT workers and, like, all these rescue workers with water and, like, set up, like, these places where you could find people. Oh, because when I talked to my mother, I had asked her if anybody had heard from my uncle, and she said no. So I thought, like, maybe I should stop at one of these centers and see, you know, just give him his name and see if if they know where he is, like maybe he signed in there, like, and he's just walking somewhere. But it was so crowded, and I just wanted to get, to my people. I wanted to see that they were okay. So I went in through the building, and around the back there's like an outside plaza that connects two buildings. So I was walking down, it's like a bridge, and I could see Elizabeth's father at the end, and he was just staring up at, there was a perfect view there of the buildings, but there wasn't now. But he was standing there, and 7 World Trade was still there. And we were looking at where they used to be, and I was looking at the 7 World Trade Center, and I just couldn't believe it, and I couldn't believe what they'd gone through that day. I just couldn't believe the buildings were gone, and I couldn't believe that they had witnessed it, that they had stood there and been, like, a part of it, And I still hadn't seen any buildings collapse, or the planes hit the building. I hadn't seen anything. So I really didn't even know. So I talked to her dad for a few minutes, and he was so upset, and I said, all right, well, I'm going to go inside. And I went inside, and it was dark, and it was quiet, because there was no electricity in Elizabeth's mother's house. There was no lights, there was no TV, there was nothing. It was just dark and quiet. And, but it wasn't pitch black, but it was dark coming up the stairs, and then the light from the windows, but that's all there was. And Elizabeth was laying on the couch. She had on this pink and white striped shirt. She was so pregnant, and she was just laying there, and I was like, hi, and, and her mom was in the kitchen, and I was like, are you guys okay? I mean, I was afraid, I was afraid for what they'd lived through just that day, I didn't understand it, and I was sad for them, and I was really upset that this had happened to them, and that they had been there, that they had stood there and lived it. I felt like I had been removed. I had been taken out of the situation, and I didn't, had it been 2 weeks earlier, I would have still been off for the summer, but I wasn't, so I felt so bad that they had lived through that. So, I don't even think we talked for 5 minutes. I don't even think that 5 minutes passed, and we heard this, like, rumbling and this shaking, and I could see Elizabeth. She got so scared, and she was just, like, lifting up her belly so she could run, and her dad came in, and he screamed, run, and her mom was like, run, the building is collapsing, and it was 7 World Trade was collapsing. So we all ran, grabbed the dogs, and, Elizabeth, she was running, and it was so hard for her, and it was just such a terrible, terrible scene, and I felt like, oh my God, like, now I've been spared this all day, and I'm new, and I'm fresher, I have more energy, I can deal with this better, I didn't go through this already 3 times, let me do what I can. So I tried to talk to firemen to get her a wheelchair so that we could, like, just push her uptown, just do something. But then we decided that we would leave, that we would take her father's car and go to her brother's house in New Jersey, really that we should leave the city. I mean, we were afraid, Elizabeth especially was like, what about gas leaks and fires, and, like, what if other buildings collapse? I mean, and she was, those were legitimate fears, you know what I mean? And if she did go into labor, she was having, like, pain in her stomach, we weren't sure if it was from, like, the running and the stress on her body, or, who knows? You just don't know. So we thought it would be safer to go to Jersey. And that whole day, like, people had been waiting to hear from people, like I said, the woman in my job, she was waiting to hear from her husband, and the other woman that I worked for was waiting to hear from her roommates, and she did, and they both did, and so they were, like, calmer, and we were also waiting for a man named Sal, who I had worked with for 3 years, who worked for Elizabeth's brother, who was a really close friend of ours, and nobody had heard from him all day, so we were really scared about that. So it was like a list. It was like Sal and my uncle, and then, like, a whole bunch of people that we could go down a list that were safe, which was really, really, really something to be grateful for. But there was still those two, those two that, like, you just are waiting. And we got to Jersey, and I called my mom, and again she said no, and it was late now. It was like maybe 10:30. It was all day. And she said no, they still haven't heard anything, but it doesn't look good. And there were all these other people like on TV, like with missing signs, and my family just didn't go there, you know. They didn't ever refer to him as missing, or you know, like maybe it was just more like, no, it doesn't look good. And she told me that my grandfather had spoken to my uncle in the morning at 9. My aunt had just started a new job. She's a teacher too, and she started this job in September at this high school, and she was so happy with her job. She was so, like, anxious to really start. So she had been at work, and he knew he couldn't reach her, and he didn't want to call the school, so he called my grandfather. And he told him, like, you know, I don't know, I think I'm trapped, you know, we're here, we're trapped. And he worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, but none of that I knew. You know, I didn't know the details. So when I called my mother, she gave me this, you know, these details, and he worked, I think it was the 104th floor, and he worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, and then, like, we put the news on, and then I saw the buildings, and I saw the planes, and it was so unreal. It was just, I don't even know how my mind absorbed it all. I don't know. But all we kept hearing, like, while we watched was Cantor Fitzgerald, and, like, a million times, and I was just like, is this real? You know what I mean? Like, is this true? So we stayed in Jersey for 2 days, and Elizabeth, you know, was just resting, and she was taking care of herself, and making sure that she was, like, took it easy, and, you know, we all tried to, like, make it a little bit easier, and then, I remember I called my aunt's house once from there, just because I wanted to tell them, you know, I'm thinking about you or whatever. And my aunt answered, and she answered, like, quick, like, on the second ring or something, and I said, you know, are you okay? And she said, I just don't know what to tell my kids. You know, she has 3 of them. They were all under 14, 13, 12, and 7. And she said, it's just so violent. It's just so violent, and I don't know how to tell, like, I just don't know what to say to them. And, I mean, the days after that, like, after the 11th, just the days after, and, like, we went home, and, like I said, we live only 5 blocks away, and smoke, and it was all the people, and the FBI, and, like, all these, like, really serious people were around, and it was just so difficult. And I worried, you know, that Elizabeth was going to go into labor, and she wasn't going to be able to, like, get the treatment that she needed, but she didn't. I mean, I admire her strength. I mean, she just held herself up, you know. She held her baby in, really, you know what I mean? Like, she just waited and waited until it was at least a little bit calmer, you know? And, I always like to think that for those 10 days that before, you know, the baby came, that she was in heaven, you know, and she was there with all of these people that maybe didn't expect to be there. But that she was especially there with my uncle, you know, and that maybe, like, he held her for a while, or, like, you know, kept her up there for a while until things settled down a little bit. Because she's, like, I can't, like, to have her in our life after, for that whole time after, for this whole year, has been, like, such a savior, like, such a saving grace, like, her beauty, and she's just so sweet, and she's so smart, and, like, I don't know if it's a collective, like, something from all of the people that died, and you know, that I believe she was surrounded by before she came. I don't know what it is, but she's just such a blessing. And I do like to believe that, you know, my uncle and her had, you know, they passed each other, or they were involved somehow. And, you know, it's funny because I had seen my uncle once on the train. We had gotten on together at the World Trade Center on Cortlandt Street. We got on the local, And he was excited. He said, "Oh, wow, hi," and he's a young guy. He's only 39, now. And this was years ago. So I said, "Oh, hi." And he said, "You really should come out to the house. You really should. Your aunt, she'd love to see you. She'd really love to see you." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I will," but I didn't. I never did. I just wasn't interested. I was just too busy, I guess. But since he's died, I've gone a lot, I've made it a point to go, and I just wonder if, experiences like that, did that really happen, or was that just like a vision for me to remember, you know what I mean? That comes to me now, I just have learned so much from September 11th. Oh, and that night, Sal called. He had just been lost all day, just caught in, the whole mix of people, and lost his phone and wasn't able to call. And so, there are two people that I lost. One, my uncle, and another friend of a family friend. And, those are two people that I know, two people's families that I know, But other than that, there was, maybe 10 or 15 or 20 people that survived it, you know what I mean? So I learned to appreciate, that even in tragedy there are gifts, even Reagan, she's a gift. And I don't know, it was a horrible lesson. There's so much about it that I don't understand, and there's so much about it that hurts so deeply, so often. But there's also, this lesson about life, and about really caring about what you're every day, and caring about the people in your life, and really, really, really not taking them for granted. So, that's it, I guess. This is Reagan. That's my story.